Welcome back to Chapter 5 of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Did you make a prediction about what was going to happen in Chapter 5? Remember, we can only use the information that we have so far to make a prediction about what's going to happen next. Let's see if you were right. Chapter 5. Back on this side of the door. Because the game of hide-and-seek was still going on, it took Edmund and Lucy some time to find the others. But when at last they were all together, which happened in the long room where the coat of armour was, Lucy burst out. "Peter, Susan, it's all true. Edmund's seen it too. There is a country you can get to through the back of the wardrobe. Edmund and I both got in. We met one another in there, in the wood. Go on, Edmund, tell them all about it." "What is this all about, Ed?" said Peter. And now we come to one of the nastiest things in this story. Up to that moment, Edmund had been feeling sick and sulky and annoyed with Lucy for being right, but he hadn't made up his mind what to do. When Peter suddenly asked him the question, he decided all at once to do the meanest and most spiteful thing he could think of. He decided to let Lucy down. "Tell us, Ed," said Susan, and Edmund gave a very superior look, as if he were far older than Lucy. There really was only a year's difference between them. And then a little snigger and said, "Oh yes, Lucy and I have been playing, pretending all her story about a country in the wardrobe is true, just for fun, of course. There's nothing there really." Poor Lucy gave Edmund one look and rushed out of the room. Edmund, who was becoming a nastier person by the minute, thought that he'd scored a great success and went on at once to say, "There she goes again. What's the matter with her? That's the worst of young kids. They always—" "Look here," said Peter, turning on him savagely. "Shut up! You've been perfectly beastly to Lou ever since she started this nonsense about the wardrobe, and now you go playing games with her about it and setting her off again. I believe you did it simply out of spite." "But it's all nonsense," said Edmund, very taken aback. "Of course it's all nonsense," said Peter. "That's just the point. Lou was perfectly all right before she came here, but since we've been down here she seems to be either going queer in the head or else turning into the most frightful liar. But whichever it is, what good do you think you'll do by jeering and nagging her one day and encouraging her the next?" I thought, said Edmund, but he couldn't think of anything to say. "You didn't think anything at all," said Peter. "It's just spite. You've always liked being beastly to anyone smaller than yourself. We've seen that at school before now." "Do stop it," said Susan. "It won't make things any better having a row between you two. Let's go and find Lucy." It's not surprising that when they found Lucy, a good deal later, everyone could see that she'd been crying. Nothing they could say made any difference. She stuck to her story and said, "I don't care what you think, and I don't care what you say. You can tell the professor, or you can write to Mother, or you can do anything you like. I know I've met a fawn in there. I wish I'd stayed there. And you are all beasts, beasts." It was an unpleasant evening. Lucy was miserable, and Edwin was beginning to feel that his plan wasn't going as well as he'd expected. The two older ones were really beginning to think that Lucy was out of her mind. They stood in the passage talking about it in whispers long after she'd gone to bed. The result was that the next morning they decided they really would go and tell the whole thing to the professor. "He'll write to Father if he thinks there's really something wrong with Lou," said Peter. "It's getting beyond us." So they went and knocked on the study door, and the professor said, "Come in," and got up and found chairs for them and said he was quite at their disposal. Then he sat listening to them, with the tips of his fingers pressed together and never interrupting till they'd finished the whole story. After that, he said nothing for quite a long time. Then he cleared his throat and said the last thing that either of them expected. "How do you know," he asked, "that your sister's story is not true?" "Oh, but," said Susan, and then stopped. Anyone could see from the old man's face that he was perfectly serious. Then Susan pulled herself together and said, But Edmund said they were only pretending. That is a point, said the Professor, which certainly deserves consideration. Very careful consideration. For instance, if you will excuse me asking the question, does your experience lead you to regard your brother or your sister as the more reliable? I mean, which is more truthful? That's just the funny thing about it, sir, said Peter. Up until now, I'd have said Lucy every time. And what do you think, my dear? Said the Professor, turning to Susan. Well, said Susan, in general, I'd say the same as Peter, but this couldn't be true, all this about the wood and the fawn. That is more than I know, said the Professor, and a charge of lying against someone whom you have always found truthful is a very serious thing. A very serious thing indeed. We were afraid it mightn't even be lying, said Susan. We thought there might be something wrong with Lucy. Madness, do you mean? Said the Professor, quite coolly. Oh, you can make your minds easy about that. One has only to look at her and talk to her to see she is not mad. But then, said Susan and stopped. She'd never dreamed that a grown-up would talk like the Professor and didn't know what to think. Logic, said the Professor, half to himself. Why don't they teach logic at these schools? There are only 3 possibilities. Either your sister is telling lies, or she is mad, or she's telling the truth. You know she doesn't tell lies, and it is obvious that she is not mad. For the moment, then, and unless any further evidence turns up, we must assume that she is telling the truth. Susan looked at him very hard and was quite sure from the expression on his face that he was not making fun of them. But how could it be true, sir? Said Peter. Why do you say that? Asked the Professor. Well, for one thing, said Peter, if it was real, why doesn't everyone find this country every time they go to the wardrobe? I mean, there was nothing there when we looked. Even Lucy didn't pretend there was. What has that to do with it? Said the Professor. Well, sir, if things are real, they're real all the time. Are they? Said the Professor. And Peter didn't know quite what to say. But there was no time, said Susan. Lucy had no time to have gone anywhere, even if there was such a place. She came running after us at the very moment we were out of the room. It was less than a minute, and she pretended to have been away for hours. That is the very thing that makes her story so likely to be true, said the Professor. If there really is a door in this house that leads to some other world, and I should warn you, this is a very strange house, and I even know very little about it. If I say she had got into another world, I should not be at all surprised to find the other world had a separate time of its own, so that however long you stayed there would never take up any of our time. On the other hand, I don't think many girls her age would invent that idea for themselves. If she had been pretending, she would have hidden for a reasonable time before coming out and telling her story. But do you really mean, sir, said Peter, that there could be other worlds all over the place, just around the corner, like that? Nothing is more probable, said the Professor, taking off his spectacles and beginning to polish them, while he muttered to himself, I wonder what they do teach in these schools. But what are we to do? Said Susan. She felt the conversation was beginning to get off the point. My dear young lady, said the Professor, suddenly looking up with a very sharp expression at both of them. There is one plan which no one has yet suggested and which is well worth trying. What's that? Said Susan. We might all try minding our own business, said he. And that was the end of the conversation. After this, things were a good deal better for Lucy. Peter saw to it that Edmund stopped jeering at her, and neither she nor anyone else felt inclined to talk about the wardrobe at all. It had become a rather alarming subject, and so for a time it looked as if all the adventures were coming to an end. But that was not to be. This house of the Professor's, which even he knew so little about, was so old and famous that people from all over England used to come and ask permission to see over it. It was the sort of house that is mentioned in guidebooks and even in histories, and well it might be, for all manner of stories were told about it, some even stranger than this one. And when parties of sightseers arrived and asked to see the house, the professor always gave them permission, and Mrs. Macready, the housekeeper, showed them round, telling them about the pictures and the armour and the rare books in the library. Mrs. Macready was not fond of children and did not like to be interrupted when she was telling visitors all about the house. She'd said to Susan and Peter almost on the first morning, along with a good many other instructions, "And please remember, you're to keep out of the way whenever I'm taking a party over the house." Just as if any of us would want to waste half a morning trailing around with a crowd of strange grown-ups, said Edmund, and the other three agreed with him. That was how the adventures began for the third time. A few mornings later, Peter and Edmund were looking at a suit of armour and wondering if they could take it to bits, when the two girls rushed into the room and said, "Look out, here comes Macready and a whole gang with her." "Sharp's the word," said Peter, and all four made off through the door at the far end of the room. But when they got into the green room and beyond it into the library, they suddenly heard voices ahead of them and realised that Mrs. Macready must be bringing her party of sightseers up the back stairs instead of up the front stairs as they'd expected. And after that, whether it was that they lost their heads or that Mrs. Macready was trying to catch them or that some magic in the house had come to life and was chasing them into Narnia, they seemed to find themselves being followed everywhere. Until at last Susan said, "Oh, bother those trippers. Here, let's go into the wardrobe room till they've passed. No one will follow us in here." But the moment they were inside, they heard voices in the passage and then someone fumbling at the door. And then they saw the handle turning. "Quick," said Peter, "there's nowhere else." And he flung open the wardrobe. All four of them bundled inside it and sat there, panting in the dark. Peter held the door closed, but didn't shut it, for of course he remembered, as every sensible person does, that you should never, never shut yourself up in a wardrobe. That's the end of chapter 5. We haven't really seen the professor up to this point. He's sort of been a low-lying character in the story. But Peter and Susan go to see him because they're worried about Lucy. She could be lying, but more importantly, she could be going mad. What advice does the professor give them? Two main things he tells them. To believe Lucy and to mind their own business. And how does he come to the conclusion that Lucy is probably telling the truth? What does he use as a word he mentions? They don't teach children this in school. What's the word? Logic. It's the process of reasoning step by step from the information that you have what the truth could be. And so he lays out three possibilities. What are they? That Lucy is lying, that she's going mad, or that her story is true. And so, using his logical reasoning brain, he says, well, Lucy generally tells the truth. So, and Edmund? Okay, so logically, Lucy is more likely to be telling the truth. And then she's not going mad because by speaking to her, you can clearly see that she's not going mad. Therefore, the logical inference is that she is telling the truth. But Peter counters this with the idea that if something or some things are real, then they're always there. And the professor seems to have a very open mind, because what does he say? Are they? He's prepared to hold this doubt or this open-mindedness. And then Susan says, but there was no time for her to have had this adventure. And what does he say? That in a parallel world he would expect there to be a different time that has no bearing on our time, so we couldn't tell how much time had gone by. And furthermore, what point does he make, what evidence does he suggest to prove that Lucy was in this alternate time zone? What's the evidence as far as he's concerned? What would she have done if she were making it up? she would have stayed away for longer, for a more reasonable amount of time, a more believable amount of time. The professor says another couple of things which suggest that entering a world through this house could very well be possible. Do you remember what those things were? It's a very strange old house that even he doesn't know that well. So this could be something about the house as well, which lends itself to this sort of thing taking place. What prediction are you going to make about what comes next? We now have all 4 children in the wardrobe, and Peter very sensibly hasn't shut the wardrobe door. And again, here the narrator's also putting him in the camp with Lucy and othering Edmund. What prediction? All 4 children are now in the wardrobe. What do you think is going to happen? Remember, we're using the information that we have so far. Let's think about the latest conversation the professor had with Peter and Susan. And let's think about what is likely to happen next. Find someone or something to talk to about your prediction. Say why. Use your evidence from the text. You're using the information that you have so far from this chapter to come up with a logical, likely suggestion. Until next time.